Pseudopod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you.
Pseudopod, episode 643, April 12th, 2019. This week's story, The City of the Gone Away, by Ambrose Bierce.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
Hello everyone, welcome to Pseudopod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from one of the kings beneath the hill of genre fiction. I'm not going to tell you anything about Bierce. If this is your first time spending time inside his words, I'm honestly a little envious. He is... let me put it this way. Draw a straight line. Start with Jordan Peele. Draw backwards to Rod Serling. Draw backwards to Richard Matheson, although I'm aware they're at least loosely contemporaneous. Keep going backwards. The start of that line, certainly in American genre fiction, is Washington Irving and Ambrose Bierce. That's how good he is. Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, in particular, is just extraordinary, and this story is just as good. As is this story's narrator, the incredible B.J. Harrison, who is one of the most stalwart champions of classic genre fiction. And not in that sense of, if it's old it has to be good, which is the thing I often struggle with. No, B.J. is incredibly good at finding stories which still sing, which still have things to say, which if anything have different things to say as time passes. And it's an honour to have B.J. on the show once again. So... the Doctor will see you now, and unfortunately, everything the Doctor's about to say, well, it might not be true.
The City of the Gone Away by Ambrose Bierce. Narrated by B.J. Harrison. I was born of poor because honest parents, and until I was 23 years old, never knew the possibilities of happiness latent in another person's coin. At that time, Providence threw me into a deep sleep and revealed to me, in a dream, the folly of labor. "Behold," said a vision of a holy hermit, "the poverty and squalor of your lot, and listen to the teachings of nature. You rise in the morning from your pallet of straw, and go forth in your daily labor in the fields. The flowers nod their heads in friendly salutation as you pass. The lark greets you with a burst of song, the early sun sheds his temperate beams upon you, and from the dewy grass you inhale an atmosphere cool and grateful to your lungs. All nature seems to salute you with the joy of a generous servant welcoming a faithful master. You are in harmony with her gentlest mood, and your soul sings within you. You begin your daily task at the plough, hopeful that the noonday will fulfill the promise of the morn, maturing the charms of the landscape and confirming its benediction upon your spirit. You follow the plough until fatigue invokes repose, and seating yourself upon the earth at the end of your furrow, you expect to enjoy in fullness the delights which you did but taste. Alas, the sun has climbed into a brazen sky, and his beams are become a torrent. The flowers have closed their petals, confining their perfume and denying their colors to the eye. Coolness no longer exhales from the grass, The dew has vanished, and the dry surface of the fields represents the fierce heat of the sky. No longer the birds of heaven salute you with melody, but the jay harshly upbraids you from the edge of the copse. Unhappy man! All the gentle and healing ministrations of nature are denied you in punishment of your sin. You have broken the first commandment of the natural decalogue. You have labored. Awakening from my dream, I collected my few belongings, bade adieu to my erring parents, and departed out of that land, pausing at the grave of my grandfather, who had been a priest, to take an oath that never again, heaven helping me, would I earn an honest penny. How long I traveled, I know not, but I came at last to a great city by the sea, where I set up as a physician. The name of that place I do not now remember, for such were my activity and renown in my new profession, that the alderman, moved by pressure of public opinion, altered it, and thenceforth the place was known as the City of the Gone Away. It is needless to say that I had no knowledge of medicine, but by securing the service of an eminent forger, I obtained a diploma purporting to have been granted by the royal quackery of charlatanic empiricism at Hoodos, which, framed in immortelles and suspended by a bit of crape to a willow in front of my office, attracted the ailing in great numbers. In connection with my dispensary, I conducted one of the largest undertaking establishments ever known, and as soon as my means permitted, purchased a wide tract of land and made it into a cemetery. I owned also some very profitable marble works on one side of the gateway to the cemetery, and on the other an extensive flower garden. My mourner's emporium was patronized by the beauty, fashion, and sorrow of the city. In short, I was in a very prosperous way of business, and within a year was able to send for my parents and establish my old father very comfortably as a receiver of stolen goods, an act which, I confess, was saved from the reproach of filial gratitude only by my exaction of all the profits. But the vicissitudes of fortune are avoidable only by practice of the sternest indigence. Human foresight cannot provide against the envy of the gods and the tireless machinations of fate. The widening circle of prosperity grows weaker as it spreads, until the antagonistic forces which it has pushed back are made powerful by compression to resist, and finally overwhelm. So great grew the renown of my skill in medicine that patients were brought to me from all the 4 quarters of the globe, burdensome invalids, whose tardiness in dying was a perpetual grief to their friends, wealthy testators, whose legatees were desirous to come by their own, superfluous children of penitent parents, and dependent parents of frugal children, wives of husbands ambitious to remarry, and husbands of wives without standing in the courts of divorce. These and all conceivable classes of the surplus population were conducted to my dispensary in the City of the Gone Away. They came in incalculable multitudes. Government agents brought me caravans of orphans, paupers, lunatics, and all who had become a public charge. My skill in curing orphanism and pauperism was particularly acknowledged by a grateful Parliament. Naturally, all this promoted the public prosperity, for although I got the greater part of the money that strangers expended in the city, the rest went into the channels of trade, and I was myself a liberal investor, purchaser and employer, and a patron of the arts and sciences. The City of the Gone Away grew so rapidly that in a few years it had enclosed my cemetery, despite its own constant growth. In that fact lay the lion that rent me. The alderman declared my cemetery a public evil, and decided to take it from me, remove the bodies to another place, and make a park of it. I was to be paid for it, and could easily bribe the appraisers to fix a high price, but for a reason which will appear, the decision gave me little joy. It was in vain that I protested against the sacrilege of disturbing the holy dead, although this was a powerful appeal, for in that land the dead are held in religious veneration. Temples are built in their honor, and a separate priesthood maintained at the public expense, whose only duty is performance of memorial services of the most solemn and touching kind. On 4 days in the year, there is a festival of the good, as it is called, when all the people lay by their work or business, and, headed by the priests, march in procession through the cemeteries, adorning the graves and praying in the temples. However bad a man's life may be, it is believed that when dead, he enters into a state of eternal and inexpressible happiness. To signify a doubt of this is an offense punishable by death. To deny burial to the dead, or to exhume a buried body, except under sanction of law by special dispensation and with solemn ceremony, is a crime having no stated penalty because no one has ever had the hardihood to commit it. All these considerations were in my favor. Yet so well assured were the people and their civic officers that my cemetery was injurious to the public health that it was condemned and appraised, and with terror in my heart I received 3 times its value, and began to settle up my affairs with all speed. A week later was the day appointed for the formal inauguration of the ceremony of removing the bodies. The day was fine, and the entire population of the city and surrounding country were present at the imposing religious rites. These were directed by the mortuary priesthood in full canonicals. There was propitiatory sacrifice in the temples of the once, followed by a processional pageant of great splendor, ending at the cemetery. The great mayor, in his robe of state, led the procession. He was armed with a golden spade, and followed by 100 male and female singers, clad all in white and chanting the hymn to the gone away. Behind these came the minor priesthood of the temples, all the civic authorities, habited in their official apparel, each carrying a living pig as an offering to the gods of the dead. Of the many divisions of the line, the last was formed by the populace, with uncovered heads, sifting dust into their hair in token of humility. In front of the mortuary chapel, in the midst of the necropolis, the supreme priest stood in gorgeous vestments, supported on each hand by a line of bishops and other high dignitaries of his prelacy, all frowning with the utmost austerity. As the great mayor paused in the presence, the minor clergy, the civic authorities, the choir, and populace closed in and encompassed the spot. The great mayor, laying his golden spade at the feet of the supreme priest, knelt in silence. "Why comest thou here, presumptuous mortal?" said the supreme priest in clear, deliberate tones. "Is it thy unhallowed purpose with this implement to uncover the mysteries of death and break the repose of the good?" The great mayor, still kneeling, drew from his robe a document with portentous seals. "Behold, O ineffable, thy servant, having warrant of his people, entreateth at thy holy hands the custody of the good, to the end and purpose that they lie in fitter earth, by consecration duly prepared against their coming." With that, he placed in the sacerdotal hands the order of the Council of Aldermen decreeing the removal. Merely touching the parchment, the supreme priest passed it to the head necropolitan at his side, and raising his hands, relaxed the severity of his countenance, and exclaimed, "The gods comply." Down the line of prelates on either side, his gesture, look, and words were successively repeated. The great mayor rose to his feet. The choir began a solemn chant, and opportunely a funeral car, drawn by 10 white horses with black plumes, rolled in at the gate and made its way through the parting crowd to the grave selected for the occasion, that of a high official whom I had treated for chronic incumbency. The great mayor touched the grave with his golden spade, which he then presented to the supreme priest, and 2 stalwart diggers with iron ones set vigorously to work. At that moment I was observed to leave the cemetery and the country. For a report of the rest of the proceedings, I am indebted to my sainted father, who related it in a letter to me, written in jail the night before he had the irreparable misfortune to take the kink out of a rope. As the workmen proceeded with their excavation, 4 bishops stationed themselves at the corners of the grave, and in the profound silence of the multitude, broken otherwise only by the harsh grinding sound of spades, repeated continuously one after another, the solemn invocations and responses from the ritual of the disturbed, imploring the Blessed Brother to forgive. But the Blessed Brother was not there. Full fathom, too, they mined for him in vain, then gave it up. The priests were visibly disconcerted. The populace was aghast, for that grave was indubitably vacant. After a brief consultation with the supreme priest, the great mayor ordered the workmen to open another grave. The ritual was omitted this time until the coffin should be uncovered. There was no coffin, no body. The cemetery was now a scene of the wildest confusion and dismay. The people shouted and ran hither and thither, gesticulating, clamoring, all talking at once, none listening. Some ran for spades, fire shovels, hoes, sticks, anything. Some brought carpenter's adzes, even chisels from the marble works, and with these inadequate aids set to work upon the first graves they came to. Others fell upon the mounds with their bare hands, scraping away the earth as eagerly as dogs digging for marmots. Before nightfall, the surface of the greater part of the cemetery had been upturned. Every grave had been explored to the bottom, and thousands of men were tearing away at the interspaces with as furious a frenzy as exhaustion would permit. As night came on, torches were lighted, and in the sinister glare, these frantic mortals, looking like a legion of fiends performing some unholy rite, pursued their disappointing work until they had devastated the entire area, but not a body did they find, not even a coffin. The explanation is exceedingly simple. An important part of my income had been derived from the sale of cadavers to medical colleges, which never before had been so well supplied, and which, in added recognition of my services to science, had all bestowed upon me diplomas, degrees, and fellowships without number. But their demand for cadavers was unequal to my supply. By even the most prodigal extravagances, they could not consume the 1/2 of the products of my skill as a physician. As to the rest, I had owned and operated the most extensive and thoroughly appointed soap works in all the country. The excellence of my toilet homoline was attested by certificates from scores of the saintliest theologians, and I had one in autograph from Badalina Fatti, the most famous living soprano.
So, let's talk about Andreas Vesalius. Andreas Vesalius is extremely my jam. One of the first historical figures I learned about, and one who has basically refused to leave my brain ever since. So much so that there is at least one published Doctor Who adventure seed, I think still in print too, which involves corpse-stealing shenanigans with him, and possibly also robot dogs. Because who doesn't love feral robot dogs, right? Anyway, Vesalius, born in a crossfire hurricane on New Year's Eve 1514, was a doctor. More specifically, he wrote textbooks on human anatomy and studied the theories of Galen, the most renowned anatomist to date. And by studied, I mean completely discredited. Because it turns out Galen had respected the sanctity of the recently dead by not actually touching them. Instead, he'd paid lots of attention to animal corpses and just figured we were basically the same. Yeah, no. But, of course, if Vesalius studied cadavers, then the question arises, where did he get them? Why, everywhere they were in the ground, of course. The House of his generation was also the Indiana Jones of his generation, and spent a good deal of time teaching students how to pick locks and run from dogs, as well as, doctor stuff. There's some wild details about this, up to and including students reportedly sneaking corpses into class, dressed in their spare clothes and doused in alcohol. So, Weekend at Bernie's, it turns out, is both fun and educational. Oh, and Vesalius died when he was marooned during a sea voyage. Seriously, his life is amazing. We'll drop a couple of links in the show notes about him. I mention him here because I can't help but feel Andreas would have been one of our protagonist's best customers. I find something, well, it's certainly not reassuring, but weirdly chipper about his, well, I'm a terrible doctor, but boy do I make a good soap attitude that's impossible to dislike. Also to trust, but you get the point. He's working an admittedly horrible angle, but that's all he's doing. And sometimes you just have to sit back and admire the side hustle. The grisly, decayed, horrifying side hustle that will traumatize so many. Okay, maybe not admire. Anyway, brilliant work both. We salute you and would like to get our healthcare literally anywhere else. Thank you, please. Let's talk about money, because we're doing something kind of interesting with money at the moment. We've got two main goals over on our Patreon. The first is to raise our pay rate to 8 cents a word, and the second is to start paying our associate editors, which is our initial slush teams. The associate editors are vital. They are the first point of contact between us and authors. They are the tips of the sword. They are the people who find the stories that work, who champion stories all the way up the line. They are vital to us, to these shows, to how they sound. And they are, like so many aspects of genre fiction, people who are not paid for their time. A lot of us wear lots of different hats and work in different fields in genre, and one of the things Margaret and I do is run a convention volunteer team. We don't get paid for it, we get our hotel room covered, but that basically means that we get a room that we're in for about 5 hours a day for a long weekend covered, and the rest of the time we're holding a convention together and occasionally eating chips. Without getting all soapboxy and without losing focus, the volunteer economy in genre fiction is kind of one of my bugbears. I don't think it's sustainable, I certainly don't think it's fair, and I think everyone has lent on it for entirely too long. And that's one of the reasons why we're working so hard to get to the point where we can afford to pay our associate editors, because everyone deserves to be paid for their time. Everyone deserves to be paid for their time, and I want to be able to pay these people for the essential work that they do. And that's kind of where you come in, because we are entirely donation funded. I have introduced us more than once as, hi, I'm Alistair, I run Escape Artists and it's an impossibility. We're rocking up on 15 years old and we're powered by you, which is just incredible and bananas and wonderful and brilliant, and thank you so much if you have ever supported us financially or support us financially now. But the truth is, we're an engine, and engines always burn through fuel and we always need more. So please, if you can help out, if you can help us get to these goals, not only would that make us incredibly grateful, but we will literally give you stuff. Seriously, you want to know about what kind of stuff we're going to give you? Great, I'm glad I imagined you asked. You can either go to pseudopod.org and click on Feed the Pod and subscribe for as little as $5 a month, or click through to Patreon, and again, from $5 on up. One of the Patreon levels gets you, I believe, quarterly merchandise, stickers, mugs, that kind of thing. Very cool. Individually designed as well. While that $5 level across both platforms gains you access to our premium audio content bucket. Like I say, we've been around 15 years, and we have done a lot of extra content in that time, and it is pretty much all in that bucket. And it costs you $5 a month to gain access, not just to it, but to the material that is constantly also being put in there, because the fun never stops around here. So, if you can help out financially, please do. It's needed, and it would help get us to a very good place. If you can't help out financially, you can help out socially. The more reviews we have on iTunes and Google, the more discoverable we become. Spotify as well, I think. Likewise, if you have a blog and you liked an episode, write about it. If you have a newsletter and you liked an episode, write about it. I have a newsletter. It's flipping great. It's big fun. If you liked an episode and you have a Twitter account, tweet about it. Anything like that. You'll be amazed how much Signal raises our profile. You'll be amazed how much that helps. So, whether you can afford to help out financially or whether you can give us a couple of minutes of your time, there's lots of stuff you can do that will help us get better at what we do, and through that help raise the industry and make it a better place for everybody. Which sounds great, doesn't it? Should we do that? Let's do that. Anyway, we'll be back next week when, as now, we will be released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. And we proudly present to you Buzz Dixon, Chris Sundberg, countless narrators, one of whom is probably me, for Flash and the Borderlands Horror Comedy Showcase, or, as I have insisted on calling it in my notes, I Was a Podcast Horror Comedy Special. We'll see you then, and we will leave you with this quote from my all-time favourite Nathan Fillion vs. Horrible Goo movie, Slither. Of course, when I tell that story, it's going to be the other way around. Thanks, folks. We'll see you next week.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.